Welcome to Art with Alison. Today we'll be discussing tone and value using a satin fabric and some tomatoes. Welcome to Fabric and Folds episode. Today we're going to sort of go a little bit different. We're going to use line instead of value to discuss the concepts of fabric. I'm using my literal notes from school. Observe the strange board. The 7 deadly folds is something that my teacher, Rob Anderson, a little trademark Rob Anderson, when I was at the Atelier School of Classical Realism in Oakland, California, he was my teacher in figure drawing, and he also sort of came up with this. I'm not quite sure if it was his, but the idea of basically there's 7 sort of general ideas of fabric and their behavior on the body and in general that you want to pay attention to. And so we're going to start with the first one. Number 1 is called a pipe or cord fold. And it really is sort of a single, this is sort of like hanging your jacket off of a hook in the doorway. This is the, general like 1 point hanging, and there's these sort of pipe that's happening. It actually can kind of fold a little bit. You can kind of see that there's actually volume that's happening inside in here that's turning around. It's pulling away in a sense from the wall, and that you can kind of see this, like these shapes are kind of happening. And this is stuff that you'll see support like coming from the shoulders or that type of fabric. For 2, we've got what's called in here, I'll call pipe or cord. 2 is Zig Zag, and I apologize for my terrible handwriting. And this is basically the twisting. That's the twisting of the fabric. This is happening with like basically like the bunching in the torso, in the back. This is the stuff that's happening like in the armpits and the side of our fabric and that sort of part of our body. And so this is something to think about. And so there's this sort of twisting, and these are the shapes that you would find on the fabric for a body. Let's see, I'm trying to find if I can make room. I'm gonna have to turn the page. Let's do 3, which is the diaper pattern. Like, that sounds strange. That really is kind of that cascading banner. This is the stuff, you have the banners that are, for the flag and whatnot. Like, that's what this is. And that's that cascading shape that you can find right there. And then I'll just kind of try and squish it a little bit. It is 4 half lock. And this is basically the like lifting of the fabric. And I'll show you. Bloop, 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 bloop. And it's kind of confusing. This is a twisting sort of happening. This part twists, and you can kind of see that, like say in a toga, or like in scarves where they have like the cowl and it's sort of twisted, and you have like fabric that's bunching and then sort of the underside's coming up and underneath, or even like togas where they've wrapped it and they kind of pull it around their shoulder, and there's hanging and twisting, but part of it's from underside is coming up underneath. And so that's the sort of idea of this twisting that's happening too, coming from these 2 central points, or these 2 high points. And so with that, we're going to switch, go into 5, which is the spiral. And this is the stuff that's happening with the, it's kind of small, but I'll draw it from this way. I'm going to actually draw the actual piece. You can see. This is the elbow. This is the knee and pants. This is the fabric of a bunching up on a cylinder as it's now being bent. So you have this cylindrical shape that's going around the form, right? And then the fabric is kind of curling and bunching, and it's creating these sort of spirally shapes as it's spiraling up and around the body. And so that's something to also pay attention to, and you can really see that in this piece right there. You can see this as an example. Number 6 is called the drop fold. And that is, I'll do it on this side. This is sort of like a fabric in the wind. I kind of pinned it off the side, but it's the idea of it where it's almost the pipe fold that then is sort of being cascaded away. And that's, you know, like Gone with the Wind and like the fabric of her skirt flowing in the wind, that kind of idea of things like being picked up by the wind and whatever that means. And so there's that. And then 7 is the inert fold. And inert literally means just a pile of fabric. Just, there's no energy, there's no weight, there's no pulling or lifting, defying gravity. Gravity is completely taken over. The only effect is really the weight of the fabric. If it's really, really heavy, heavy fabric, it's gonna be even more crumpled and more flat. This fabric's kind of light, kind of like muslin. It's a light cotton, so it's actually kind of bunchy. But even then, you just want to see how it's sort of crumpled. This is sort of dirty clothes on the floor. This is just like throw the towel. Like there's no motion, there's no vitality, there's no movement. So that's where the opposite basically of the drop fold and the spiral. And this, I think, the diaper pattern, I believe, I want to say it's also the full lock. It's sort of the, I believe, these 7 concepts of fabric are really the most sort of key, and when it comes to rendering people wearing costumes or even just a still life fabric, anything that you want to understand fabric. I'm going to just do a quick little example. When we're twisting, this is sort of the eye of the fold is the idea of it. I want you to think about that too. It's just where is there the energy that gets pulled when we have this twisting and turning. There's literally this sort of like eye of the needle. There's these little like rivulets that happen. You can see the same like in there too. There's these little circles that swirl that happens. And that's something to just also be conscientious of. Let's see, yeah, it moves. The fabric will always move away from the point of origin, and there's this sort of energetic up energy too. You don't want to think about everything falling. There's also a lifting that's happening. And those are important to think about in the sense of like shoulders and hips are definitely the key points of where the fabric is going to be hanging off of the body that will then be loose from that. And so that's where, I'll just do a full lock example. But these sort of points, and that would be like also like a skirt or any sort of, even like the, cherub Cupid or whatever with the baby with the like wrapping of the fabric around their waist. It's always these sort of key hip points. Same with the shoulder. There's a lot of costumes or a lot of, where it's literally pinned at the shoulders and then this sort of cowl neck that drops. So there's a lot of ways of interpreting fabric. I want to do a quick little thing on pants really fast. So the tuck of pants is, if we're sitting down, there's a flowing up and this sort of bloop, and it kind of falls away. So this is what's happening with pants in the sense when you're sitting down, and then there's this like, whoosh. So energetically these lines as they're converging, and then there's this folding that, again, this is the eye of the fold. That eye gets pushed, it actually bulges out a little bit, comes back down and flows. And so that's sort of, looser sort of pants. You also want to think about just the concept of like skirts, the stitching folds, and how that's going to affect fabric and how it's pinned and basically like will go and fold in on itself. You want to think about too when we're thinking about standing pants. Let's do a drawing of pants. What happens is it actually kind of crinkles, like especially like zoot suit, but in general, like you wear like a little bit of a baggier pant, it's going to gather at the foot and it will actually rest on top of the foot. Sorry, this is a poor foot rendering. And then here's the shoe. But you can see there's this sort of like, zigzag. As the fabric is like becoming inert, it's literally falling down and kind of crumpling. That crumpling when you're trying to draw somebody, that's not going to look, if you don't have these elements in there, it's going to look very flat. It's not going to read. And so you just want to think about how the fabric falls from the body, and then where is it going? It doesn't just fall off into space and float away. There's actual gravity, and everything kind of pools. And you can even see, like, if we're sitting, I'm sort of really exaggerating the eye of the fold of someone in pants sitting. And I know that's like, what is that? But this is literally a person's body. This is their hips. This is their knees. But that idea of when we sit, it compresses on the front, goes that way, and then the back of the knee, it's compressing and creating these sort of interesting shapes. That's the type of stuff that's super, again, if you were having the lines coming from an opposite direction, it just doesn't make any sense. If we were to do like a cross cut of the leg, of the leg pattern, sort of front of the legs, they're sort of paying attention to as well, like where is the leg residing in the actual pants based on where you're sitting. And so thinking about that like when we're sitting this way, the leg is actually much closer towards the front. It's actually pushing on right here, and there's more or less like volume there. And so you have to think about what's happening underneath the fabric is affecting what you are seeing. I'm going to do a quick example of arms and fabric, shoulders, whatever that means. We're going to go into figure drawing in a later episode. But I just want to show the idea of jackets and folds and what this means of like someone hailing a cab or just raising their arm to grab on the bus handle. This idea of the compression of the shoulder as the higher up the arm goes, how much more, where is the fabric bunching basically? So from it being flat shoulder, arm at our side, lifting a little bit, lifting even further. You can even see my sweater too. It does that same thing where it's just like from flat, following the seam, the shoulder seam, literally. The seam should theoretically fall right at the shoulder. And then as it lifts, it starts to compress more, really follow the deltoid, this point right here. And then it lifts up and it crunches and it starts to compress. And so these are little things that, again, if you don't have a awareness of when you try to draw somebody with this, or just in sense being aware of the fabric, it's gravity. Literally the gravity is pulling the fabric down on the body. So that's a lot of stuff. I'm putting a lot of technical knowledge. We're now going to put this whole fabric concept into practice. So next up we will be doing a little setup and trying to draw fabric. Let me do my my line of action. Just like, what is she doing? That's a very strange line of action. There's tomatoes in there. Why did you just make that squiggle? It's where my eye is flowing. And so now I'm going to start drafting generally what I'm seeing. Not too committed, not too specific at this point. I'm just trying to find, I may lighten up my line of action, but at least I'm remembering that it's there. I'm remembering what was important to my eye when I was those first 3 seconds, that first initial reaction. What was happening? What caught my eye? What was interesting to me? So I'm just quickly rendering general notation of where things are. Still, if anyone were to walk in, they would have no idea what this is. If they only looked at it right now, they would tell, if you told them it was a still life of a few tomatoes, they'd be like, no, it's not. You have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm going to kind of doing some general wrinklies. I'm just kind of blocking that out, blocking this out. I'm not really being too exact. So with that, I'm going to take my kneaded eraser, clean it, stretch it for a little bit, get ready. Now I'm going to go and we're talking about key. At this point, it's a pretty dark fabric, right? There's a lot of, if you were to average out everything in this scene on the range of dark or light, it's gonna fall in the darker key. And so I'm gonna be using a lot more charcoal and not as much of my kneaded eraser. If anything, it'll just be for like down here. Like that's really almost the lightest lights for the most part. It's actually not even the subjects, it's just the paper around it. And that's okay. That's something too. And I may want to define again, my environment dictates the shape of the objects that I'm actually studying, because the objects are not in a vacuum. We are surrounded by atmosphere, there's particles in the air, there's all kinds of things that the environment is literally affecting us, the light. So we want to incorporate that. It's not like there's a drawing and then you just cut it out and paste it on a white piece of paper. I see those and I'm like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't know. I think you could go a little bit further. I think you need to have at least an indication of environment, even if it's just a slight indication. So now I've taken out a good amount. I need to use my charcoal. It's too dark of a piece to not do it. So now I have to really get in there. But I'm thinking about the fabric too. This is a satin fabric. It's very shiny. It's similar to metal in the sense that the band of the gradient is very tight. Whereas like the cotton fabric, the highlight's a little bit smoother and it can kind of fall away where everything is kind of happening really close together, which is similar to metal, like that chrome look. So I'm just kind of blocking it in. This is purely the fabric. Again, I'm still not even talking about the tomatoes, but in a way, by me filling in the fabric, the tomatoes will become revealed. And that's, again, this idea of by not thinking, I'm going to draw a tomato, I'm just kind of seeing shadow and light patterns. I'm seeing this dark shape that surrounds the tomato. I'm seeing this dark shape that surrounds the tomato. I'm seeing this dark shape that surrounds the tomato. I'm seeing things that are not the literal tomato, but once we're done, it will evoke the tomato. That sounds strange. Evoke the tomato. But it's about not being, because again, that literalness, if I think I'm going to draw a tomato, my brain's going to draw and fill in the blank with the tomato that I think it should be, that path of least resistance of like, I know what a tomato is. I know what my nose looks like. That idea, we have to take that away. I have to say, I'm not drawing a tomato right now. I'm drawing this weird shadow shape that connects to this other shadow shape. And if you can see it and think about it more in that way, strangely enough, you're going to have an accurate representation of your tomatoes or whatever it is you're drawing. I think that's something that, again, people get really overwhelmed with. They think that, oh, I've got to be serious about it. I got to capture it and got to get the tomato just right. And it's just like, just slow down and just see the shapes. Let's just see the forms. The tomato will reveal itself as we sort of work through this process. So I'm kind of following, we have a combination of things happening when it comes to the fabric. We're seeing a form underlying that's defining the highlight and the shape, which is the circular sort of hat box shape that I have underneath this fabric that the things are sitting on. And so there's literally this sort of shadow break. You can see it kind of falls. That's that circular of the lid. I'm also seeing as it flows and goes up and over this way. And then there's these eyelets, these eyes of the fold. There's another eye of the fold. And we can make decisions too. Do I want it to be so busy? We can edit. This is the part with artistic license, you are way more intelligent than any camera or photograph. You can make decisions. You can edit and decide, what do I want to tell in this story? I can choose to add every little nuanced detail of this wrinkling fabric, or I can just sort of indicate it and have just enough to where at a certain point, what is the focus of this piece? Is it to look at all the little noodly fabric, or is it to see it as a whole? And we have to find that balance. Sometimes people get so wrapped up in trying to get the accurate detail of the fabric or just of the objects that they're studying that they lose track of the bigger piece and realize that all of a sudden your eye goes straight to that and only that. And we don't break out of seeing it as a whole. Like, I think that's yeah, we get really stuck in not realizing that if you were to just walk in cold with what they would say like fresh eyes, taking a break from your work and looking at it new, you'll see right away, be like, oh, that's weird, there's way too much detail over there. I got to take it out. So I think there's something to that too. Another option is if you really want to get a sort of fresh perspective is to turn it upside down. You can also put it in a mirror, like go in the bathroom mirror and look at it in the bathroom mirror, and sometimes upside down. You can flip them around and change the way you're seeing it so it's not a literal representation. The more you can separate your brain from the actual thing that you're doing, the more accurate you'll be. And I know that's counterintuitive. You're like, I need to focus, but it's actually the lack of intentional focus allows for you to see the overall, the bigger picture kind of concept. And I know that takes time. These are ideas and concepts that takes years to really master, and the idea of really being able to do it quickly and easily and efficiently. But with practice, you will be able to. It's just, we have to go through the sort of sometimes the challenges. I'm kind of making choices. Do I want that bump there? It's kind of distracting. So I'm going to take it down a little bit. I'm going to pull it here. We can make those editorial choices again. I'm choosing to say, where do I want the focus of my eye to be? Keeping it more in this range will help that. And so if I had it too much over there, my eye starts getting pulled in a direction I don't really want it to go. So now I'm just thinking valiantly add and fill in. This is literally just like coloring book. You can create, in a sense, I'm creating my own coloring book. Stay within my lines that I've just now decided are my regions of fabric. It's really loose. Again, it's not precise. Now I'm going to say, here's the little eye of the fold. There's that. I'm going to do this like, it does kind of have this like square part that's kind of interesting that comes up. But then maybe just floop, 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 floop. You can also choose to have it break the page. There's a lot of things. We'll go a little bit further in composition in another episode, but I just want to show fabric for right now, what that means. So I'm kind of hitting, a wall with this material. I need to kind of go darker. I'm about as tonally as dark as this fabric or this material will get. Let me see, actually, I think we do that with the tomato. Probably think of it, the tomatoes are kind of. So again, the tomatoes, they have shadows on them. They are tonally darker. The red is kind of middle tone, but is it as dark as the black of the satin fabric? No. So I have to be conscientious of that. I don't want to be too heavy-handed. Again, I want to make sure that I maintain the integrity of the tomato, maintain the color, the tonal element of it so that it doesn't get lost, because we could easily just outline everything and then it just becomes a muddy mess. And so I want to make sure that there's contrast, that there's a difference, there's things that are strange and different, and that will allow the eye to have places to go and to land, right? And that's something that's theoretically, that's Rubens. You know, he would manipulate entire scenes and forms, entire paintings and figures going up and down hills and all this stuff, and the lighting was not accurate. There's people in shadow that shouldn't be in shadow, and there's people in light that shouldn't be in light, in the sense it shouldn't be relative to what would be theoretically happening in that scene. But it works in the sense of the overall theme, because your eye follows the flow of the forms. It never leaves the page. It never just kind of flies off and goes, woo! There's just something to that, being able to manipulate with conscious choices the decision to then keep things interesting on the page that may not really be there, or may not be accurate or true, or whatever that is, but it works for the piece. And so that's just something to just keep in mind, the idea of sometimes you don't have to tell everything in order for the story to be told. It doesn't have to always be the accurate 100% truth, whatever that is to you. So I'm kind of adding a little bit of tone there. I'm going to add a little bit of darkness here. Kind of darken up this guy so it doesn't feel so outliney. And again, too, I need to pay attention to the flow of the fabric, even how I'm moving. The directionality of the flow of it is going to help to determine the energy of the drawing. And so you want to be conscientious of that too, of how the way that the direction, the energy. It was pretty dark. Okay, I'm going to really start to pull in my darks. I'm really just going to find in these little like cavity areas. And again, I'm looking at the shadow patterns. I'm creating the tomato by thinking about it's around the scene around it. And it's not an accurate representation of the tomato, but does that matter? No. At the end, if it looks like a tomato, then we've done our job. That's all that matters. So it's still a little ambiguous as a tomato, but that's okay. We're still finding it. And I've got to put this. This is kind of like a crayon almost. And then put this. So there's places too where I'm really emphasizing the dark because there's going to be places where it's a lot lighter, as well as like the cavity of the shadow. And the places in between. We got this guy in between. This little cast shadow. We've got this crisp line around it. And as we squint, we can start to see it starts to coming together slowly, popping out certain shapes, right? And this is the challenge, of course, with fabric. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of subtlety that's happening here, but I can make choices to edit and cut so that I don't have to tell everything. I'm gonna put that there. I'm gonna put this fabric here. Down. Let's see, what am I looking at? Put this. I've kind of moved the corner, but that's okay. Like there's no, hey, that corner should be over there. Like there's no art police that are gonna come and be like, don't do that. I feel like the sort of, cliche art teacher that would come in and look at your piece and stand there and disapprove and then be like, no, and then you crumple it up and throw it in the garbage. I can't count how many people I've heard tell me that story, that they themselves have had to suffer through that. It's terrible. No one learns through being shamed. No one learns being told that they're doing something wrong. No one learns from cruelty. And I think that we can find a more kinder way of approaching teaching and learning and be more forgiving, that we can find people are gonna be more receptive. They're more open to potentially failing or making a mistake that's not going to be this perfect idea of what they were supposed to be doing. So I'm kind of playing too with my hatching. I'm kind of doing a scribbling idea. Like there's no rules. There's no like, hey, you're supposed to stick to one style. How dare you? No, it's okay. We can play and be silly and be different and push things. Now I'm kind of hitting to this point. It's a fine balance. I don't want to be too crazy with this, so I got to find a medium range where I want to communicate what I'm seeing, but I also don't want to make it be too busy. So I have to kind of like sort of navigate carefully. So it's like slow down the driving, focus. This is the school zone. We gotta really slow down where we're going. So I'm kind of, again, I'm also using the side, this entire piece. I'm using the entire side of it. Now, let's just pull this down. We'll kind of give this an edge. I'm gonna now come back to my charcoal, my eraser. And now we can pop out some of the highlights. Because everything is so dark, because there's so much, the key is so low, and it's such a dark composition, when I do put in some highlights, they really pop. It really brings it out a lot so let's see, what else do I want? Maybe some of this stuff down here. And then maybe even this guy's got a little bit. I'll give some more tomato attention. This is something too, where like the combination of using produce and a still life setup with fabric, like there's multiple things happening. And if we can mix it and find a blending of different techniques, different approaches, we'll have a more well-rounded piece. Whoops. Let's see, when I'm looking at this, I feel like this needs to be darker. These are heirloom tomatoes, so this one's actually pretty light, this tomato. But one way of doing that too is to also give these sort of striations, these that I can then take down a little bit. We can kind of play with that as well. Here we're kind of incorporating a bunch of different techniques. The shadow. Using fabric, I'm using tone. Let's see, I want to add a little bit of chalk. We'll just add a tiny splash of chalk just because it needs a little bit of a highlight. And a little bit of a highlight back there. And this is where this is that final, to really make everything sort of three-dimensional and pop. It gives it that sense of volume. Let's see, this guy, very bright. This guy. And then, let's see. The tomato on the left's a little rough, but it's the reference itself is it's a unique tomato. It has its own personality. So I'm going to kind of just break this out a little bit. And then I think we're pretty much going to wrap this guy up for now, but we could go on forever and ever on rendering. But this is a quick little study of fabric and a tomato using just chalk and charcoal, and it's sort of a low key, in the sense of darker approach. In our next episode, we'll be discussing composition and how to arrange objects on a page.